Our final week in our unit on film style, we are examining film sound. Now, this, of course, is the one part of film style that is not part of the film image, but is, of course, part of the soundtrack or the audio portion of a movie. And so there's a number of things that we're going to look at in regards to film sound, concepts related to film sound, most of which are uh, concepts that involve some relationship that sound has to the film image when we are watching a movie and when we are analyzing a movie. Uh, so as I said, this is the one element of film style that is not part of the film image and does not primarily involve what we are looking at, but rather involves what we are listening to as we are watching film images. In some ways, film sound supports what we see in the image. In other ways, it enhances or sort of accentuates what we see in the film image. And at other times, film sound, or the sounds that we hear on a film's soundtrack, serves as a counterpoint to what is in the film image, or in other words, something that is different from what we see in the image, something that maybe is the opposite of what we see in the film image. And so film sound can operate in a number of different ways in terms of supporting or countering what we see in the image in a film. There are three different types of film sound, what our textbook author Sikoff calls analytical categories of sound. So as we are analyzing film sound in the process of film analysis, we can identify and look at these three different categories of sound. The first one is voice. This is an expansion on my part of what Sikoff talks about as being merely dialogue, but I would like for you to learn and to know as being labeled as voice rather than just dialogue, because I feel that voice encompasses a slightly broader range of sounds than just the word or the term dialogue does, because by labeling it as voice, we can include any other sounds that emanate from a human mouth, such as breathing or grunting or groaning and screaming and any other sort of sound that a person's voice box makes. So that is the first category, voice. The second category is sound effects, and the third category of sound in a film is music. So let's take a look at each of these three categories and discuss them a little bit further. Voice, of course, is, even though I have expanded it and encouraged you to think about it as including other things besides just dialogue, most of the time in a movie, voice is in the form of dialogue. In other words, in the form of words that characters are speaking, sometimes in groups of characters, oftentimes in just a pair of characters having a conversation with one another. And so that is the form that voice most often takes. And of course, it is in the content of that dialogue, the content of the spoken words spoken by characters, in which we get nowadays a great deal of the narrative information in a film, as well as a great deal of the insight that we get into character that we are becoming familiar with in a movie. And it is also in the delivery of dialogue and the use of vocal aspects in terms of speaking that a great deal of the actor's performance or of actors' performances takes place in a movie as well. And so primarily when we're talking about voice, we are talking about dialogue between characters. Sound effects include any and all sounds that emanate from inanimate objects in a film. These can be noises that we hear just as background noises, what is called ambient sound. You know, just the miscellaneous sounds that you hear in the background of any kind of a location, in outdoors, in a rural type of location, maybe the rustling of trees, different animal sounds such as birds, etc. In an urban setting, uh, cars driving, um, horns honking of cars, and other miscellaneous mechanical and just crowds milling about and that sort of thing in an urban setting. In terms of background noises. The other thing that falls into the category of sound effects is noises from purposeful sources, that is, noises that objects make that maybe are props in the scene, or noises from objects that have some sort of significance in a scene, that have some sort of a purpose in a scene. Some sound effects have that nature of having more central importance to what is happening in a scene and to the narrative action of a particular scene than those other sorts of sounds or noises that we hear that are just in the background. And the third category of film sound is music. Now, there is a lot of music in films in general, and some of it is from a source within the story. In other words, a character in a movie turns on a radio and music is coming out of it, or is playing some sort of a musical instrument that is creating music, or uh, whatever other source that music might be coming from that is actually coming from within the story world, and that the characters within the narrative within that story world are able to hear. Then there is another kind of music which does not come from within the story world, and that the characters within the story world are not able to hear. This primarily comes in the form of music on the soundtrack that is either in the form of instrumental music, that is a score, sometimes described as a background score. So again, like background noises, something that is not prominent on the soundtrack, but is sort of in the background, that we can hear often very softly as sort of an underlying element of sound. And then, of course, at other times, there is music that is also not from within, not coming from within the story world, but is much more louder, flourishes in the instrumental score, or in recent decades, rock and roll songs, popular music, songs of different kinds, usually with lyrics that are included as music in the soundtrack, that we hear as viewers and listeners to a movie. This difference between whether or not sound comes from a source within the story or does not come from a source within the story is at the heart of this distinction that we call diegetic sound versus non-diegetic sound. Now, I've referred already to what I called the story world of a film, and that is an analytical term that film scholars have developed, uh, which usually goes by the name of diegesis. Diegesis, which is sort of just a fancy word meaning the story world of a movie. And it is that story world, which is sort of the fictional world within which the action of a movie takes place. And there are certain things usually in the diegesis of a film that are possible or not possible based on how closely that diegesis that a film has resembles the real world. Sometimes things happen or exist in a film's diegesis that do not happen or exist in the real world as we know it. But regardless of exactly what the nature of a film's diegesis is, there is some sound which emanates from that diegesis and other sounds that does not emanate from that diegesis. There are sounds that characters within the narrative, the characters that exist within the world of that story as it is portrayed on film, that can hear, and then there are other sounds that the characters within that story world are not able to hear. And many types of music, such as instrumental background scores and other songs that accompany uh, action in a film, are things that are not able to be heard by the characters within the story world. When there is an orchestral score playing, usually characters cannot hear that. That is only for our benefit as viewers. And so this is the basic distinction between diegetic sound and non-diegetic sound. And any of the categories of film sound can be diegetic or non-diegetic, although most of the time when we do talk about diegetic or non-diegetic sound, we usually talk about it in relationship to the music, as I was speaking about in the previous slide. Uh, Voiceover narration is the other type of sound, which is most often non-diegetic in nature after music. And oftentimes we have voiceover narration, which is not coming from a character in a movie, but which is coming from some sort of a narrator that is not a character in a movie, and which is just for our benefit, again, as listeners and as viewers of the movie. So, to review, the key question in trying to determine whether or not a sound is diegetic or non-diegetic is asking yourself the question, can the characters in the scene hear the sound? If the characters can hear the sound, then that sound is diegetic, whether it's music or any other sort of sound. If the characters can hear it, it's diegetic. It is coming from the story world in which the characters live. And if those characters cannot hear the sound, then it is non-diegetic sound. It is something that is present in the film strictly for our benefit as viewers of the film, in the form of music or in any of the form of the three analytical categories of film sound: voice, sound effects, or music.